Hope you guys are doing all right. Let's do the news. I'm not going to keep this one all that long. It just kind of backs up a point that I've been making for the past several weeks. We are dancing to the edge of oblivion, and one step after the next. The Biden administration understands, they get it, that we are escalating this conflict, not just provoking and keeping this conflict going. That's why he wrote that ridiculous op-ed to try to basically tell the American public, we're not just trying to hurt Russia, blah, 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 blah. And yet, here we are, more sophisticated weapon systems. However, he gets a pinky swear that Zelensky won't use these systems to hit Russian targets. I told you immediately in my last video that that was basically countermanded by a retrofit, the one who was basically working with Zelensky as one of his aides. Quote, Crimea is ours. It belongs to Ukraine, and they know it. Therefore, it will fly to Crimea double time should the need arises, he pointed out. And he made the point of saying we've hit such targets in the past. Yes. But the catch here is using Russian or American weapons. There's also another catch. It's not necessarily the weapon system. It's the missile systems that are basically used with those weapon systems that allow those things to reach certain distances. Well, this is a problem, right? We have a contradiction, or do we? Like I said in the previous video, it is the height of incompetence to not define what is meant by Russian territory. So even though Blinken will come out and say, we got assurances that they won't do this, and Ukraine comes out and says, we will hit Crimea. Because from Ukraine's position, that's not Russian territory. From Russia's position, that is thoroughly and completely, decisively Russian territory. How did you not define that? That is a massive loophole. Meaning, if Russia looks at Crimea as their territory, and these guys are attacking their territory with U.S.-made weapons, is that not the escalation that the Biden administration was concerned about when it got them to make the pinky square? It doesn't matter what Ukraine thinks in this, even though it does. But from the standpoint of escalation, it doesn't matter. What matters, meaning if the United States is looking at this and saying, okay, what does escalation mean? Escalation means hitting Russian territory. Okay, fair enough. We don't want them to do that. Meaning the perspective that matters, the only perspective that matters, how does Russia see it? That's all that matters, right? Why do you care? The Ukrainian position, if Russia is saying this is something that we won't tolerate and we would consider this an escalation and we will respond accordingly. But Ukraine doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. What does Russia think about it? And so this is a massive loophole. This is a problem. Fast forward to today. I keep saying we are dancing at the edge of oblivion step by step. Russia will strike west if U.S. rockets hit us, says Putin ally. This gentleman right here. Right here. Dmitry Medvedkov. I have trouble pronouncing his name. Dmitry Medvedev. And that's not right. I can hear it in my head, but I can't say it. This is difficult to say. At least for me anyway. But it's the gentleman right here. He used to be, I believe, president at one point. This was a few years ago. I remember when he first came onto the scene. So right here. Washington said this week that it was sending M142 high mobility artillery rocket systems to Ukraine, which will more than double the army's artillery range and allow it to strike targets 50 miles away. Quote, if God forbid these weapons are used against Russian territory, then our armed forces will have no other choice but to strike decision-making centers, said Dmitry Medvedev. That's it. A former prime minister under Putin, okay, he was prime minister, not president, fair enough, who was deputy chairman of Russia's National Security Council. Of course, it needs to be understood that the final decision-making centers in this case, unfortunately, are not located on the territory of Kiev. He was talking to Al Jazeera. Now, let's unpack that for a moment. Oh, I was right. Medvedev served as president for a single term from 2008 to 2012, but was widely viewed as Putin's puppet. Okay. The West views everything that happens in Russia as Putin, so there's that. We got to unpack that. His point does make sense, right? Meaning, you're in a war for security. The overwhelming majority of your population agrees with that war, so you get 80% approval, even in polling that is usually not favorable from the standpoint of Putin. Okay, fair enough. the West decides, from your framing, when the Soviet Union fell, you expanded NATO to basically threaten us. You targeted us. You continued that expansion with Ukraine being kicked over. Again, you put in a radically Russophobic government that was a vassal state of the U.S. who's hostile to Russia's very existence. So there's that. And so from their framing of this, and from the country's framing, you basically started a war. You're provoking a war. This is a war for security. And the public says, we agree. This is indeed a war for security. That's not because they're Putin puppets, per se. That's because they live there and they fully understand the threat that NATO and the U.S. poses to the very existence of the country. They get it. Flesh to bone. You don't, because you accept your monsters as being perfectly okay. Those people are sociopaths. And if you look at the level of fires that they've been setting around the world, whether in the Middle East, whether the kill squads in South America, this is not a gentle country. All of those movements were provocations, and they understood that all of those moves were provocations. You've been attacking us with sanctions for decades. Again, they understand it. The only reason that Russia doesn't hit Western targets, believe it or not, is only because of the ramifications of doing so. Meaning you're in a war for security. And all of those countries that basically provoked this war in the first place starts dumping in as many weapons, money, and everything else to keep that war going, to kill as many Russians as possible. You understand, everybody gets, your objective is to keep the war going, to kill as many Russians as possible. That is your objective. You're using Ukraine as that objective. All right. The problem is, though, that I can't hit any of those other centers that are dumping those weapons in. Because if I do that, the ramifications are profound, more profound than we can really comprehend. So I can't do that. So I'm limited. Now, the catch here is, in comparison to the ramifications of what would take place if I hit a Western target, I'm winning the war. Meaning, I am pursuing my objectives on the ground. Yes, they're a nuisance. Yes, they're a pain in my ass. Yes, they're targeting me. But the moment that I hit them, the ramifications are utterly profound in comparison to a war that I am currently winning. Not just winning, I am chewing through the Ukrainian forces. They are throwing in old men and children into the battlefront because the other ones have basically been encircled and annihilated. There's heavy fighting in Severodonetsk right now. Kherson region and these counterattacks came from basically not with heavy Ukrainian losses. And even in this kind of a counterattack in Severodonetsk, they made no additional ground. So it's like you're winning a war. You're accomplishing your objectives. And don't just take me. German intelligence, if there is such a thing. Right here. Quote, the German intelligence fears the Ukrainian resistance could even be broken in the next 4 to 5 weeks. BND analysts have noted that while Russians are moving much more slowly, they were able to conquer small bits of territory each day. This is out of Der Spiegel. They're accomplishing the objectives. You're hearing Ukrainian troops' morale entirely broken. And yeah, they may be fighting in these pockets, but these are losing wars and losing conflicts. They continuously take heavy losses. By Zelensky's own words, 100 Ukrainian troops a day. Do you honestly believe that it's 100? Other analysts count that as much higher. So I guess the point that I'm making here is, yes, the West is targeting us. Yes, the West is dumping all of these weapons into the country. Okay, yes. But the ramifications are too big for me to do anything about that directly. The only thing I can do is focus on the war, because that is something that I am winning, and I beat all of them when I put down the Ukrainian military. Keep in mind, the objective of Russia was to destroy the Ukrainian military. And the fact that Ukraine keeps trying to hold on to every patch of land and throwing old men and whatnot into the fold, that basically helps Putin accomplish his objective, as opposed to them basically pulling back and getting to another strong suit, in which case Russia would have to chase the military. Whatever. They want this stuff for peace negotiations, meaning they want to hold on to something of the Donbass region. But based on German intelligence, again, shocked that such a thing exists, are basically saying they may potentially lose the entirety of the Donbass region within a few weeks. Give it 5. Hell, give it 8. They went with 6. So no, I don't need to go extreme. However, the calculus changes. If you hit Russia, oh, that's different. That's different. Understand why that's different. It's one thing if I'm fighting a war, and yes, my troops are dying because of the weapons you're putting into the country, but I am winning that war. I am decisively winning that war. So I have no need to escalate in that sense. If you start hitting Russian cities, where those people come out, there will be a fervor and an uproar where those people will be screaming for blood, just like anybody else in any of those countries would be screaming for blood if somebody attacked those countries. And that is on top after you targeted the country for the first point. Started an economic war in the second point with the stated objective in both of those to degrade the Russian military, or for that matter, destroy the Russian state. And you have the US president basically saying, Putin needs to leave. With all the regime change operations that the United States has gone into, Putin already believes that it's the perspective of the United States. Why wouldn't that be the perspective of the United States, given the things that it has done to other countries it didn't particularly like? So, you hit Russian territory. All bets are off. You're dancing to oblivion. And the public in that country will be screaming for Putin to do something about that. Now, the gamble here that the West is taking is, maybe Putin is bluffing. Well, the reality of it is, Putin didn't say this. And so it needs to be understood. It's almost like a statement made by Moscow without a statement being made by Moscow. I don't believe for a moment that Medvedev put that out willy-nilly or randomly. Put that out as a warning and as a threat. It is done so with this, it doesn't have the gravity of Putin saying it. Meaning Moscow can put this threat out without having the president himself make that threat. Because the moment that Putin says it, that shit is in stone. That is not a red line. That is a line of granite that is very clear and present to anybody that wants to see it. And I don't think, at least I'm not one of those people that think Putin's bluffs, especially on issues of national security. So the fact that Putin didn't say it on some level gives a little leeway for them to think about and respond in accordance to how they need to respond based on the threats, or let's say the risk of escalatory steps, without Putin saying it. It's almost like we're putting this out there, but we're not entirely putting it out there from the standpoint of the president making it an ironclad statement of what he will or would not do. It's not like Obama saying red line and then Obama goes back on it. It's not that. It's not that. They wouldn't do that. That would destroy credibility. And credibility matters because you need people to understand that you're very serious about what you are saying. So what they do, they know. Meaning, if they at the very least believe you're credible in what you're saying, when you tell them something, they will believe it. And if your credibility is destroyed, they will test you. And that testing in and of itself can cause all sorts of problems, which means the credibility matters. Last point on this. This presents a problem. Now, the reason I say it presents a problem, it presents a few problems, right? Zelensky, for several months, had been shopping or petitioning the rest of the Western leaders to initiate World War III. He had been running around the globe from pillar to post, begging anybody that would listen, please start World War III. We need you to do this. Ukraine needs this. They told him, no, we don't want to start World War III. We want you to go and fight and die to the last Ukrainian to degrade the Russian military while we take economic steps to destroy the Russian state. Neither one of those things happened. In fact, those things backfired massively. But Zelensky, in his head, we're losing. We need help in order to win it. We need you guys to get involved. Problem, right? You can see the problem right there. If the Ukrainian government, from the standpoint of Zelensky, is thinking he wants the Western powers to get involved in a conflict, and U.S., in their heads, are saying, okay, we can't allow these guys to strike Russian territory, it could escalate. Well, what is in Ukraine's interest? Think about the question. What is Ukraine incentivized to do in this situation? If everything stays exactly the way it is, they're going to lose the Donbass region. And based on reporting by Alexander McCurris, they're not creating a strong point in the West. They're just sending every able-bodied old man and child into the conflict, and by child I mean 16 and older, into a war zone where they are massively unprepared. Meaning they're basically being used as cannon fodder in order to say we're holding on to a patch of ground. I mean, McCurris made a point of like 15, 20,000 men. That's astonishing when you think about that. They are not going to get into it. Meaning this, for one, shouldn't be taking place. So there's that. But on top of the fact that this shouldn't be taking place, their strategy is astonishing. They are wasting all of those lives in order to not negotiate, pushed by the West to do so. With the West basically funding this by giving billions of dollars to prop up the state and all of the weapons and so forth, just to keep this war and conflict bubbling. It's astonishing when you think about what they're doing. They're not even building a hard point, or at the very least, I'll put it this way, the way McCurry says it, he doesn't believe they're doing it. To me, that seems the most rational thing in the world to do if you're basically losing a bunch of men. Unless you're just losing those men for no reason, which is just ghastly, and I can't contemplate. All things being equal, it's one thing if you say, I'm going to lose those men because I'm getting time in order to fight the war. All things being equal, that's what Stalin did, right? I mean, throwing people into the fray with this idea of we're creating strong points, we're creating centers where we can counterattack and take back the territory. In that case, it worked. If these idiots are just throwing lives into a meat grinder, oh, that is ghastly. That is ghastly. I already think Zelensky is a dirtbag, but this is just unhinged, to put it mildly. Talking about a waste of life, or for that matter, even trust of the people who are basically leading you. It's astonishing. Does Ukraine have an incentive to provoke a larger conflict with the thought that we're losing this? There is no way for us to win this. The weapon systems aren't getting here on time, or we don't necessarily have the manpower in order to put these weapon systems in the first place, or we can't even get these weapon systems to the line of combat where they can actually do use in any sort of way that would change the outcome of the way things are going. What happens if we provoke a larger conflict where the West gets involved because the West gets attacked? Is that not what Zelensky wanted when he was petitioning those various governments for assistance? Yes, that's dark, right? But this is existential. You have to look at it through the lens of our country is being destroyed. We're being balkanized. The Russians are going to take Ukraine, or at the very least take all of those parts of Ukraine. We can't win it on our own. These guys egged us into this thinking that they were going to help us once we got into this conflict. They did not. They wasn't willing to fire a shot, even though they were willing to give billions of dollars in weapons. We need them in the conflict for us to have a chance of winning. How do we get them into the conflict? We petition them, they don't want to do it. We've begged them, they don't want to do it. What if Russia just so happens to strike a Western thing? What happens? If, indeed, we hit a Russian target, does it provoke Russia to go further and escalate? Those are dark questions. But these are the situations that they basically presented us with for dragging the world into this nonsense. And so now you have the U.S. saying, well, they say they wouldn't use the weapons that way. And Ukraine saying those are legitimate targets in the Crimea. And Russia saying, if you hit Russian territory, we will respond by hitting Western targets. Period. Mic drop. Fuck with us if you want. Test us. Now, this creates another problem, right? You may have Western leaders, the same idiots, the gang of vassal state idiots in Europe that basically decided to go along with this incompetent president. They could say, we don't believe that Russia is willing to do that. Meaning we don't believe that they're willing to risk the ramifications of a third world war to do that. So, if Ukraine hits those targets, it may be okay. Do you want to take that gamble? Now, Russia could turn around and say, we don't believe that if we hit those Western targets, that the United States will be willing to get involved into a third world war in order to protect those other states. We don't believe that. We think NATO is a paper tiger, and we believe that the moment that we hit a Western target, they're going to fold. These are existential questions. And the people who are basically making decisions on those things have not been rational actors. Have not been. Under no circumstances. They provoked this conflict in a way that we did not have to be here. Meaning the famines that people are experiencing, the lack of revenue, and the gutting of the middle class, for the matter of the poor in the United States and Europe. None of that stuff needed to take place. They did all of the stuff. This is a culmination of 40, 50 years of policy that these guys basically enacted. They took a maximalist position on each and everything that came up instead of being rational actors. And now all of those people are being killed in a catastrophe. And on top of that, Now we're having these conversations about existential issues of a potential third world war because of the way European leaders have basically decided we're going to fuck with Russia. We're going to target Russia. And now that they basically responded, they're in over their heads. And now the Biden administration is terrified of escalatory consequences. Ukraine is not. Ukraine needs those escalatory consequences. They may even want those escalatory consequences. But again, this is where we are. Those are the questions, right? I mean, this is the stuff that we're actually presented with. This is dark stuff. I mean, the globe is on the edge of oblivion. And it didn't have to be there. And now we have to have people who are basically thinking to themselves or questioning whether or not Russia is serious about responding in such a way. Or for that matter, Russia questioning whether or not the West will really stand up for NATO, or whether it is indeed a paper tiger and will fall apart and find itself to be defunct the moment that Russia hits a Western target. I don't like any of these questions. I don't like any of these questions. I don't know anybody in their right mind who would like any of these questions. And yet, here we are. Standing alone, I'd like to know what circumstances need to happen for the United States war to abolish NATO movement to become a real force. The abolish NATO movement would happen overnight if the moment that Russia hits a Western target and Russia and the United States doesn't do anything. Meaning, if Russia turns around and hits Poland, Poland doesn't believe that NATO would defend it anyway. But if they turn around and hit Poland because of something that Poland does, and the U.S. is like, here's a reason that we can't necessarily go in for this particular thing. We're not going to risk a third world war. NATO is done overnight. You don't even need a movement for it. The shit will collapse overnight. Music corner for depressed people. I am glad you're single again. I don't know what to say about that one. I don't know what to say about that one. Divorces are painful, man. It sure hurts. It's complicated, right? It's complicated. I am a complicated person, I suppose. Whatever. But music corner for the depressed people. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right. I am going to end this. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be in Los Angeles tomorrow. They're sending me to cover the Summit for Americas. I'm going to be newsman on the street, men in suit, all that good stuff. So if I get the opportunity to check in, I definitely will. But you guys have a great night. I will see you guys later. Dark times. Dark times. Like I said, these aren't questions I like answering. Don't get me wrong, I'm fascinated by it. It's a sick fascination, though. It's like you wonder how the people in the First World War got themselves into such fuckery. Didn't need to happen. Didn't need to happen. They were looking at each other, and they had these, like, their appraisal of what the other would do, what the other was way fucking off. And in this situation, none of these people have responded rationally. All of these people have responded under this idea of self-inflated importance in one sense. In another sense, completely disrespectful from the standpoint of your engagement with other world leaders. A mendacity that is off the fucking table. But that is the way Western leaders have responded. And now these idiots got themselves into a crisis. Economically, as all of their economies are going into a recession, the rest of the world is not engaging with them on it. Meaning the rest of the world is like, yeah, that's on you. You did that. You did that. That's your own ego. You did that. Not just that. You've also fucked over our countries. So yeah, handle this on your own. And now they're in a crisis. And so now they're in a situation where they may have provoked a world war if they keep this up and keep going in the way that they're going. And fact of the matter is, even if they relent, it may be irrelevant to the point that if Ukraine is able to get in a position where it can hit Russian territory for the exact purpose of dragging the West potentially into the war, oh, that is disastrous. That is disastrous. Of course, super chats are welcome. Where's Jamarl? Normally, he said he's going to LA. I am in Washington, D.C. I'm in Washington, D.C. Mexican Perez AMLO is righteous in his demand that all countries be invited to the Summit of Americas. He is absolutely right. Also, Jamarl will report. So this is going to be a truncated Summit of Americas. Why? Because under normal circumstances, all of those countries are invited. Venezuela, Cuba, etc. This year, the U.S. only wants countries that are going to be vassal states to U.S. interests. Now, this created a problem because many of those other countries was like, okay, well, fine. If you're not inviting everybody, we're not coming. Or we're going to send a lesser representative for our country. Are you insane? Like, why does everything have to be specific to U.S. interests? Why? Why? Is it possible that U.S. interests actually is, if you're talking about it from the standpoint of a safe, stable, secure, prospering world, that U.S. interests may not necessarily be the primary thing that always needs to be engaged? But whatever. Is what it is. No, fault lines we're going for tomorrow. Manila is going to be running it with Scotty Nell Hughes. It's going to be a lot of feminine energy for tomorrow. Michael Parks. Oh, thank you, Michael Parks. Appreciate it, man. Yeah, they're still going to be going. So fault lines are still going to be going. I am going to be doing the show on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Now, that is going to be painful. That is going to be 4 a.m. where I am in California. So yeah, that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt bad. That's going to hurt. But I'm still going to do it. Johanna, Jamarl, your analysis is super top notch. Oh, thank you. The best commentary on the war, regardless of the outlet. Alexander Macaris is probably the best that I think I've heard, especially from the standpoint of what is going on, machinations, and everything else. My commentary is usually more on almost like the logic of it, like the chess of it. It is fascinating stuff that these people are allowed for this. Because understand what has to happen for this to take place. You have to have a huge amount of propaganda for your local societies. So there's that. You got to get rid of alternate opinions that can basically explain the context of this. Because the moment that people understand the context, they're going to be pissed off. There's that. On top of that, when people are engaging you from the standpoint of, look, we have security problems that we need to deal with. You have to have everybody to take a position of, we don't accept your security concerns. None at all. We don't accept it. How are you not accepting the same security concerns that you yourself was willing to win in the world over several decades ago? Whatever, we're not accepting it. And on top of that, we are going to continue to get closer and closer to your border. Like, all of these things are hostile actions. And the moment that the public gets that, it's like, so wait a minute. You guys were fucking around like this? Why were you doing that? Now, your population may be, like, inundated with such Russian hatred that they made it just look at it as, well, we did that because we're trying to be safe. Or NATO is really loving light. They're not that bad. Or Joe Biden is a great guy, despite the fact that he provoked a war that's getting hundreds of thousands of people killed. Like, you may be so inundated into your own context where you can't necessarily see the stuff from outside of your context. Fair enough. But people are honest with themselves. And those assessments could come to that and be like, you know what? I don't like the fact that Putin invaded, but you shouldn't have been fucking around with him. Meaning they can come with an assessment that on some level wraps Putin on the knuckles for one, but also understands you shouldn't have been doing that. And in the exact same situations, your government would have responded in the exact same way. So there's that. But look, I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Shout out to you again, Michael Parks. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right, guys. You have a good night.